In going through this book, the Book of Signs by David Jeremiah, there is one chapter I want to take a good deal of time on. It may take two of these YouTubes to cover it. And it is indeed good to see that some Protestant minister is willing to cover the subject that most people don't really want to hear about, and that is persecution. And I agree with just about everything that David Jeremiah says in this chapter. And indeed, it is something that is not preached very much in churches at all. And so I will give him credit, give credit where credit is due in bringing a whole chapter on Christian persecution. I will pick up in page 111. America, he says, was founded on Christian principles. The Declaration of Independence recognizes that God is the source of human rights and freedoms. And then, quote, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. End of quote. Lots of us have heard that quote indeed. He goes on to say, this foundational premise began to erode in the middle 20th century with the post-World War II economic boom and the protest culture of the 1960s. Today, the concept of freedom has degenerated into the elimination of virtually all moral restraints. Christianity is being edged out because its adherence to biblical morality is at odds with the philosophy of unrestricted freedom that now dominates America's cultural landscape. As Dr. Paul Nyquist, try and get his name right here, Nyquist has noted, quote, we're witnessing an epic change in our culture. A spiritual climate shifts, threatening to perhaps life as we know it. Hostility and intolerance are replacing toleration. Rejection and even hatred are pushing aside acceptance. End of quote. Jeremiah goes on to say, it is no secret that Christianity is declining in America. The government, the educational system, the entertainment industry, and the media no longer share biblical values, which means Christianity is now a religious subculture, increasingly ridiculed and marginalized. And it is indeed, it is so true. Get ready, Dr. Nyquist urges. As cultural changes sweep our country, we'll soon be challenged to live out what the Bible says about confronting and responding to persecution. End of quote. Turning the page. The substance of Christian persecution, Jeremiah says, you may wonder whether persecution is too strong a word to describe what is happening to Christianity in America today. But Christianity Today, that's a magazine, Christianity Today reminds us that, quote, most persecution is not violent. Instead, it's a squeeze of Christians in 5 spheres of life: private, family, community, national, and church. We should not, Dr. Jeremiah goes on to say, we should not assume, however, that everything bad that happens to us is persecution. Persecution is only trouble that occurs for righteousness' sake. That is true persecution when it's for righteousness' sake. And he gives Matthew 5 verse 10. Sometimes, he goes on to say, sometimes our own stress, sin, or bad choices bring difficulties into our lives. And he gives the verse 1 Peter 4 verse 15. He finishes this section by saying, to be persecuted for righteousness' sake means that we are opposed or we suffer solely for following Christ. Let me say, if you want to follow Christ, you better know what Christ taught. Too many Christians do not read the Gospels, as shocking as that might sound. The Gospels are the teachings of Christ. They are the example that he left us. They are the way that we should be living in his words. So indeed, to follow Christ, you better know what Christ taught and preached. And that's in the 4 Gospels. Under his section, the stages of Christian persecution. To show the extent of the persecution problem, let's look at 5 stages of religious suppression occurring in our nation. All right, stage number 1, stereotyping. Today's Christians are often stereotyped as ignorant, uneducated, inhibited, homophobic, and intolerant. Movies and television usually feature a Christian as the antagonist, the holier-than-thou bigot who judges others harshly. That's one stage leading into persecution. Stage number 2, marginalizing. Many secularists want Christianity to be displaced from the center of American life. If the church must be allowed to exist, they want it confined to the realm of personal privacy. Keep it to yourself. Don't share it with others, even if they ask you about your faith or about Christianity. Stage number 3, threatening. Dr. Jeremiah goes on to say here under this stage 3, banning religious expression within academia, institutional, corporate, or public arenas is not enough for many materialists or secularists. They are determined to make Christianity pay the price, even when privately performing actions that conflict with the progressive agenda. For example, he says, an intern at a California State University, Long Beach, was terminated for discussing her faith with co-workers, even though she did it in her off hours. A manager in the national insurance firm was fired for expressing his opposition to gay marriage in a post he wrote online from his home computer. Brendan Irch, chief executive of Mozilla, was forced to resign when it was discovered he had personally contributed $1,000 to support California's Proposition 8, which defines marriage as the union of man and woman. You know, I was raised in the Church of England school system growing up in England. Recently, the Church of England had a meeting and they were discussing what is marriage. And it was overwhelmingly voted that marriage is defined by the Bible as between a man and a woman. Certain ones in the Anglican Church disagreed and they probably left and formed their own organization. But the Church of England still holds to the fact of the Bible that marriage is between a man and a woman. Stage number 4, intimidating. Jeremiah says, in 2013, the American Civil Liberties Union sued Mercy Health Partners, a Catholic hospital, because it did not offer abortion services to a client experiencing difficulty in pregnancy. As noted in National Review, a paper, National Review, quoting from them, the issue is not whether those who wish to avail themselves of certain services will be able to, but that those who object to them must be forced to participate. Intimidation. Jeremiah goes on to say, 2014, several Houston pastors encouraged Christians to sign a petition calling for a referendum on an ordinance that allowed men and women to use one another's restrooms. The Houston city government, under Mayor Annis Parker, ordered 5 of the pastors to turn over all of their sermons, text messages, and emails addressing homosexuality or gender issues. Refusal to comply would mean contempt of court and jail. Mayor Parker later rescinded the subpoena in the wake of nationwide negative reaction. So Christians won in that particular case. And stage 5, litigating. A growing number of Christians are being taken to court for refusing to compromise their Christian convictions. At the front line of the battle are small businesses that provide wedding services. One of the most outrageous of these incidents was the $135,000 fine levied against an Oregon bakery owned by a Christian couple who declined to bake a wedding cake for a lesbian couple. He goes on to say, many Christians have paid heavily for standing by their convictions. Many Christians have paid heavily for standing by their convictions. Some lost their life savings. Others were forced out of business or into bankruptcy. And several even received death threats from activists. I think, he says, America is a long way from the kind of persecution that involves torture and death. Yes, we may be. And then he finishes by saying, as Christians endured in the New Testament and now endure in other countries. Yes, there are some countries in this world. To be a Christian could cost you your life. But he finishes by saying, but one never knows what might lurk around the corner. It may be here and lurking around the corner, ready to spring forth. It goes on with the story persecution. We'll have to do that at another time. But you know, Jesus said in Matthew 24, when they asked him about, give us the signs, Lord, about your coming again. And he talked about wars and violence and all kinds of things going on in verse 7. These are the beginning of sorrows. Then here's one of the signs. Then shall they deliver you up, you disciples, to affliction, and shall kill you, and you shall be hated of all nations for my sake. And then shall one be offended, and shall betray another, and shall hate one another. And many false prophets shall arise and deceive many. We're living in those days now. And Jesus said, because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. But through all of this, Jesus said, he that shall endure to the end shall be saved. Indeed, persecution is going to happen at the end time to true Christians.